Welcome to Who's Ready for Anything, where we sit down with AI practitioners, thought leaders, and decision makers. My name is Matt Liu. I'm on the business development team at CoreWeave, and joining me today is Sai Choudhury, Senior Director of Business Development at Meta. Sai and his team lead AI partnerships for Meta Superintelligence Labs. Sai, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Matt.
So, Sai, something we talked about as we've expanded our partnership is how AI progress is no longer driven by any single component or isolated player in the stack.
Yep.
It's really about how entire systems come together and scale. You're really at the center of a lot of this work at Meta. Maybe we can start with your role and why building an AI ecosystem is strategically important.
Sure, yeah. So I lead up our AI partnerships work and, working with very, very talented product and engineering folks at Meta. And, we've really been committed to open source and open source technologies and kind of open standards for a long, long time. This started with things like models, but also even, tools itself. Mm-hmm. And really, there's a reason, there's a method behind the madness itself. When you're contributing to open source and you're getting others to contribute to it, you actually get new ideas, you get new features, you get bug fixes, you get things that you normally wouldn't get necessarily just like going at it yourself. Now, there are really important tools and models and other technologies that are important for us. So where that's the case, we contribute a lot. But what we find by opening it is that you get new ideas from the entire ecosystem, from industry and researchers. And that, in the end, helps us as well. So one of those, literal benefits is getting new features added that we wouldn't have thought of. Others is performance. The silicon players in the world, whether you're talking about data center all the way through client, if they're only optimizing just for Meta is an important partner for them. But if they're optimizing for Meta, it's a very different proposition than if they're optimizing for everybody. Mm-hmm. And those optimizations, at the end of the day, reduce our capacity kind of cost because we're running at a higher performance, let's say. And, at the end of the day, there's also the considerations of people looking at code and people looking at systems and like finding bugs and security issues, et cetera, that, coming from a different lens. So whether it is just literally increasing the number of features or performance or better security, all of these are really supercharged by opening our platforms. And so this is one of the reasons why we believe that open source is a win-win for Meta and also the ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's interesting that Meta not only scales adoption, but really scales trust through the open source ecosystem. And it sounds like the ecosystem is sort of the quality control layer so that people know the technology they're building on will work in production and work at scale. I'm curious if you could sort of break down for us Meta's open source AI initiatives across the stack. What are you guys focused on today?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe I'll even expand it a little bit more than just open source, but like open standards even, right? And so, really at all layers of the approach is where we're really have driven and continue to drive really with a lot of zeal and conviction around that. So on the hardware side, for many years now, we started and we continue to contribute to the Open Compute platform. And this is a set of standards at everything from chip interconnect to systems to rack for data centers. And how modularity and interoperability happens at that layer. And so that's kind of at the hardware layer, Open Compute platform. The next layer up is software tooling. And software tooling that AI engineers use is really critical, both for advancing the research as well as literally just getting the job done of training and running models. And so there, with technologies like PyTorch, VLLM, even Helion now, we either started or in many of these cases or contribute significantly to make sure these are best in class because we need to use them. But it's great that the ecosystem have adopted it as well. So that's kind of a layer above. Beyond that, we've also even done more around making sure that we open select models to the world. And this spans everything from our segment anything model, which is an amazing image and video segmentation model, all the way through to what most of, I think, your audience will know about Llama. Mm-hmm. Llama started, as you might know, as the moniker large language model meta AI. That's what Llama stand for. But Llama kind of really revolutionized the industry by having an open model available, for anyone to use, really democratizing access. So whether it's hardware, tools, or models, we really believe that by providing these specifications and technologies in the open, it does help the ecosystem, but it actually helps us for the reasons we talked about.
Absolutely. And Meta's been a very prominent champion of open source for a long time, which I think is, one of the things you're very well known for, especially in infrastructure. I'm curious, as you look ahead at 2026, of the initiatives you just walked through, what are you personally most excited about?
Well, I think one of the things that's pretty exciting is how fast the tools are advancing. Let's double click on that just for a second here. So one of the things is, everyone's heard about PyTorch. And really what's happened in 2025 is PyTorch moved from being a core tool set that does, training, fine tuning, and inference to really an agentic system. And there's a couple of, let's say, top level features of code and functionality that was added to PyTorch to really get it to this point. One of those is something called torchforge. And with Forge, we're able to actually have a full reinforcement learning harness, so to speak, built right into native PyTorch. What this allows, reinforcement learning is already hard enough from a research perspective to make sure that you've got the right balance of rewards from the reward model and actually the model you're training, et cetera. But what torchforge does is take away all the tooling aspects from the researchers and basically kind of just makes that seamless. Mm-hmm. And so the research teams, whether it's at us or at other companies, can really focus on advancing the state of the core model itself. Mm-hmm. For both mid and post-training, as it's called, and not worry about the tools. And so this is one real benefit and aspect that we expect to see in 2026. A lot of research teams in the industry really accelerate their velocity by using the functionality built into torchforge. The other example I'd like to give around PyTorch, another exciting feature that I think is Monarch. And Monarch is a programmable system for both training and inference, but really a programmable system to do distributed training or inference over 1 to 100,000 GPUs. This is really, really cool stuff because as you know very well from CoreWeave and working with many of the leading labs as you do, that the scale of both training and inference of these models is rising. And so with Monarch, again, the research teams and even the ML engineers who are like deploying the models at scale can really use this base functionality built into PyTorch to really just make their job a lot easier and really at the end of the day focus on the models and the science and less so on the infrastructure and the tooling.
Absolutely. We've had a chance to work with Joe Spizak and the Meta PyTorch team on TorchForge, on Monarch. TorchForge is, to your point, a really nice tool for RL, which is emerged as this critical vector for scaling intelligence. To your point, it's quite complex, especially when you compare it as a workload to large-scale pre-training. It's heterogeneous, it's stateful, it's iterative, yep. And TorchForge does an amazing job of helping researchers handle things like coordination and retries and orchestration, and then Monarch as that distributed computing layer under it, especially with research kind of rapidly scaling beyond what we've seen in the past, I think is going to be increasingly important this year. Yep. So we're really excited about the work that we've managed to do with you guys. We're excited to see where that goes this year. I'm curious, when you think about these frameworks, when you're validating them and when customers or developers are using them in practice, why is alignment with the underlying infrastructure important in making that successful?
Oh yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the underlying hardware infrastructure, and many people think it's just like a board sitting there, but really there's way more than that, right? There's the actual compute, there's the storage, there's networking, and making sure all of this works in a seamless fashion. And there are different cloud providers optimized for different things. It kind of makes sense. There's not a one size fits all. And so first and foremost, it's really important that we, Meta, working on things like TorchForge, collaborate with companies like CoreWeave to make sure that the whole system is working really tuned for your hardware systems and what you've optimized your data centers for. But maybe even more holistically, one of the things what really excites me in the work we've done together, both one-to-one and with other parties, is how how we're able to knock down new technical hurdles. It's great that we have these new features,
Yeah.
but it actually adds some new technical hurdles. For example, even with Monarch, you have 100,000 GPUs you can now train do inference. Timing and checkpointing becomes so critical. And so working with you to actually kind of knock down those barriers is important for Meta's use, but it's great because it actually then also benefits other companies as they're developing their models as well. I think one of the things that I think I'm really happy about also is the work we're doing, together in the ecosystem. I know that we reached out to you a while back to basically pose the question, look, it's great that we're working on torchforge together, but can we also collaborate with other entities? And so the work we collaborated on with Stanford's Scaling Intelligence Lab, or SSL, is really cool, where they're able to use torchforge on the CoreWeave hardware systems and see a 30% increase in their model performance and really not have to worry about the tooling. And what I mean the tooling is really the software tooling or the hardware.
Yep.
They focus on the modeling layer and saw a 30% improvement. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge from both a performance and cost perspective, but even a developer velocity perspective.
Absolutely. It's interesting, in this case, in this example, you have the researchers at Stanford, and they help inform how we design these frameworks, like the ones that Meta is building, and we can do that with them. And then your frameworks, how you guys help solve these problems, help shape the infrastructure requirements. And I think ultimately, right, like great infrastructure is about absorbing complexity. It's about handling that so that, to your point, the builders don't have to. And I think a good example, I want to give a shout out to an engineer, Aaron at CoreWeave, and then Alan at Meta PyTorch. I think they were the first two people to deploy Monarch outside of Meta, and they did it on a CoreWeave Kubernetes cluster. So it was the first Monarch on Kubernetes deployment. And that was to help Stanford stand up torchforge and scale across the CoreWeave cluster and train their model. And so I think that's a great example of what you just said, right? Which is this technical partnership, the agility to sort of solve problems together, kind of up and down the stack, and why that's important, to your point, to achieve like performance that wasn't previously attainable.
Yeah, and literally, I could say that our team is very impressed by really the diligence and the subject matter expertise that the CoreWeave team had in order to really look at this as a system level issue. It's not just, look, this is a hardware system that's plugged in and running, but more so at a system level, from the model to the tooling of torchforge all the way through to the hardware system. What needed to happen, what needed to be tweaked, what needed to be changed in order to make sure that the system works well, which then unblocks Stanford's team to just go faster.
Yeah.
And one of the things, going back to maybe your first question about why do we do open source? Look, we have a lot of really smart people at Meta. I work with some of the most brilliant product and engineering folks within our superintelligence labs, but not everybody who's smart works at Meta. I mean, we know that. And so some great ideas in the world come from other labs around the world, whether it's commercial labs like what Meta has, or university labs like Stanford's Scaling Intelligence Labs. And so if we are able to contribute to features that not only accelerate our developer velocity, but also third-party developer velocity, more interesting ideas will come. More interesting ideas, that we will benefit from, that we can incorporate from, and so it's actually great that we were able to work together to, really validate torchforge in the first non-Meta use case, and it's a good example of why we look for, back to exactly your first question, why we look to not just open source software, but actually get adoption, because it uncovers things perhaps that we haven't thought of in our own scenarios.
Yeah. It was really a lot of fun to work with Joe and his team. He is probably one of the most, I think, universally liked people in the ecosystem, which I'm sure makes community building easier. And we appreciated that technical partnership across the board with Meta and with Stanford. And we know that they're doing a lot of frontier work with some of the cutting edge labs that are spinning out now and doing really cool stuff as well. So that's awesome. I think in a lot of these engagements, scale is a big piece. We've touched on that a couple of times. Torchforge is sort of built to address RL at scale.
Yep.
Monarch definitely, right? Distributed computing at scale. When these things are stress tested, right, at real scale, what are some of the things you've seen? Like, why are these problems hard to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we all should keep in mind is that the hardware ecosystem of compute, storage, networking is moving at light speed, and the software is moving also at light speed. And so to marry these together is critical. And at any point in time, you can't have a mismatch where you're introducing a new feature that stresses the training loop, like what happens with reinforcement learning, and to make sure the GPUs and the CPU on the host board are actually aligned, kind of synchronized at the right time. These kinds of problems are really only debugged when you have scale. Usually at the smaller kind of within actually a board system, you won't get it. But when you have 10,000 GPUs, you have 100,000 GPUs, you're going to find some of these problems. And so it's pretty critical that working with a partner like yourself has been great. On our side, it's been great to work with CoreWeave as well. But really working with a partner that understands the system level to be able to go deep with us technically and unblock those for the scale related problems, that's critical.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is even more apparent in the world than ever before. Historically, even for AI development, let's say even 3 years ago, companies like Meta, research labs like Stanford would look at and the considerations of working with a cloud provider really on the basis and the focus on cost or maybe even capacity. And that lens has shifted completely. It's no longer that. Even for research labs at universities, and of course for companies like Meta, where we now focus not on cost and capacity when we're looking at a cloud partner, but what we're really focused on is capabilities and developer velocity.
Yeah.
Because they say time is money, and really time is money.
Yeah. We couldn't agree more philosophically. I think we're big believers that an infrastructure, whether that's software or whether that's cloud services, down to the hardware level, it's not as fungible as I think some people want to believe, right? Yep. To your point, great infrastructure, again, at any one of those levels, it increases the speed of iteration. It allows for that iteration to scale cost effectively. It allows people to validate ideas in production, to hopefully gain performance in a way that wasn't previously attainable. And then I think ultimately, most importantly, it's how do we absorb and handle failure so that it's not pushed onto the builder and they can just focus on what they do best.
That's right. They're unfortunately for, or maybe fortunately for companies like you, it's maybe fortunately because this is a place where CoreWeave does shine, is that performance can't come at a cost of availability.
Yeah.
And so that's not a trade-off that we as a model builder are willing to make. And so that is hard. And like availability, back to the failures happen at scale, and that's really about availability as well. And so it is something that's really, really important for how we consider that.
Yep, absolutely. Taking a step back, zooming out, you've been at Meta for over 8 years.
Yep.
You've seen a lot. You've had a really cool role that I think intersects product and engineering, probably a lot of other teams, a lot of initiatives. You've seen AI, through the various acts through to, MSL today.
Yep.
How has the partnership strategy specifically evolved in your time there? And in your experience, what makes partnerships really successful?
Yeah. Meta works with a lot of different companies in the ecosystem. And so first and foremost, what we end up finding is we're, in many cases of the companies we partner with, we're also a customer.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always so aligned where that's kind of a win-win, or maybe these were kind of two separate hats and two separate silos. But I'll give you our example is actually a great example of how that has changed. So obviously, Meta has been a customer of CoreWeave. We utilize your cloud systems to to design, train, and run some of our most leading models, and that's been great. And so, of course, I have to put that plug in to make sure that you continue to support us as great as you've been doing. That's great. But increasingly, we work with companies that actually are not only doing that, but also really investing in the ecosystem. And I don't want to make this a nebulous thing. I want to make it like in the systems, from models to tools to hardware, in the ecosystem, to actually make the entire ecosystem go faster. If the entire ecosystem gets faster, it's actually, for AI, it's better for Meta. Meta is a leader in AI, but it's actually better for Meta. And so we increasingly look for partners, and including, of course, it's been great with CoreWeave, that not only makes Meta's AI work really good, but other key ecosystem partners' AI work really good. And I'll return back to, it's all about increasing capabilities and developer velocity, something that I think our partnership between Meta and CoreWeave has really been able to achieve.
Yeah. And we're really excited because Meta, I think, of the leading AI players, is one of the most open about this importance of ecosystem and championing that. And it's something we want to participate more actively in with you. I think we started that work last year, again, collaborating with Joe and his team. I think there's so much more we could do going forward. I think that's really, really exciting in terms of a direction that we're taking now as we're expanding this partnership. I'm curious, I guess, as one last question to round out this discussion. It's been a great discussion.
Sure, yeah.
Your point earlier, you touched on Meta is in this place where I think everybody wants to work with you, right?
Yep.
Across all layers of the stack, especially MSL is going to come out with probably some really cool stuff this year. As you think about long-term partnerships, right? What is and you've touched on some of these qualities, but what is the most important quality you look for in a long-term partner at the infrastructure level, but also beyond that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty simple. It's somebody who looks at a system-level view of hardware, software, co-design. If I could use one word to summarize it, it's co-design. It's not a software problem. It's not a model problem or a tooling problem or a challenge. It's not a hardware-only problem. It's not, and within hardware, it's not networking or storage. It's really looking at it from a hardware and software co-design perspective. And those are the partners that we already have, I think, the deeper engagements with.
Yeah.
And that happens at every layer, from compute to all the way through to databases and embedding models, et cetera. It's not just the core models and the tooling, but it happens up and down the stack. But those that Meta are going deeper with are those who are co-designing with us.
Yeah, yeah. I love that word. I love co-design. I think it captures well what we've seen be successful in our partnerships. It's certainly what we strive to do, with our customers, with our partners. I think if there's one takeaway for me from this conversation, it's that if you want to be a successful, consequential company in infra, right, there's a few things. One is enabling that ecosystem velocity that you've touched on. It's about absorbing the complexity, making sure the builders can focus on what they do best. And then it's having the agility, right, to co-design, to partner closely to solve problems, especially in the space that's changing so quickly. Static infrastructure or like a static approach or mindset is just not going to cut it in AI. And so I think we're going to carry that forward with you guys. You've shown us a lot of how you build your ecosystem, how you push the boundaries of innovation on, I think, a number of different fronts. And we're really excited about that.
We are too. And, in 2026, I think there'll be a lot of more cool stuff that Meta and CoreWeave will be doing together.
Absolutely. Well, Sai, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing more about how you guys view your AI ecosystem. This has been great, and we're excited about the work ahead of us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Who's Ready for Anything. Stay tuned for more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of AI.